Thank you so much, Professor, for rounding us off this evening for side proposition. Now, closing side opposition, I'm delighted to welcome Kerem Mamyakmaz. Kerem who's standing in sort of relatively last minute this evening. Kerem is a third-year politics student at St John's and a long-standing member of the Labour Club exec. Kerem, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you may all see on your sheets, my name is not Dan, I'm Kerem, so please don't look at me for my Daily Mail articles that are absolutely disgusting. So in writing this speech, I was acutely aware of three very important things. Firstly, that my supervisors may be watching this, and their continuous help has allowed me to make this speech, but I also apologize to them for doing this instead of work. Secondly, that unfortunately I'm on the same side as someone who has made so many factual and philosophical inaccuracies that I feel the need to correct it, but that's not going to be the substance of my speech. Lastly, that what I understand as Marxism may indeed be very different to what you guys in this chamber may hold to be true, however well-founded they may be. But it is on these concerns that I have divided my speech into three sections. I need to first enunciate what I consider to be Marxism. I then need to make myself clear on what 21st century condition it is and its relation to Marxism. I then need to explain how we unfortunately cannot square the circle between these two issues. I obviously have embarked on a project that I unfortunately may not have 10 minutes to explain, but please find me in the bar afterwards. I'd be more than welcome to explain, should I not have the time. What is Marxism? And the easiest answer we can give to what is Marxism is what Marx wrote. That's a very simplification, but just allow me before anyone points of information to me. As someone who has gone through the trials and tribulations known as history of political thought at the University of Cambridge, I can tell you that Marx wrote a lot, and I mean quite a lot. His earlier writings were more concerned with abstract concepts of alienation. Clearly, the influence of his young Hegelian bringing up is very evident in there. Then we have the issue of reconciling them with his later writings. For example, his writings on the Paris Commune has been different to his earlier writings. Marxists have been struggling with reconciling these different trends in his thought. This, therefore, comes to my first contention. What Marx are we taking? What is Marxism? What do we consider as Marxism to be applicable in the 21st century? Are we taking the Marx that said, and I quote, "We have no compassion, and we ask no compassion from you. When our turn comes, we shall not make excuses for the terror"? Or are we taking Marx when he said, "Combinations among workmen cannot absolutely be identical in detail in Newcastle and in Barcelona. Insurrection would be madness where peaceful agitation would be more swiftly and surely do the work"? I mean, I think you guys can all see that those are two fundamentally different propositions that Marx wrote. Before the keen Marxists among you try to stand up and dissect what may be true Marxism or false Marxism or any of those other things, it is academic dishonesty to ignore that Marx's opinions change so fundamentally on so many questions that we should first establish what Marx were even talking about. In an effort to not make this speech sound like a Marxist Bible club by trying to ascertain what the real things are, I will thus define Marxism in terms that I'm sure we can all agree on some level. The working classes, the proletariat, are exploited. The system, capitalism, exists to extract the surplus value that the laborers produce. As long as the system of commodity production continues, the proletariat will be exploited. Emancipation, in the true sense of the word, would require removal of capitalism. Even though I've given this argument, please keep in mind that this is the closest thing we can even agree on. These few sentences. Now it is time to consider the applicability of Marxism in the 21st century. Before I do that, however, I want to describe what some 20th century socialists and their views on Marx's methodology and arguments. I'm glad to hear that Gramsci has already been mentioned, because I will mention it again. Gramsci, in one of his most influential works in the 20th century, wrote The Modern Prince. Gramsci is very critical in The Modern Prince of the belief that all phenomena in society and all emancipatory phenomena in society emanate from economics, and that he calls this as economism. Gramsci described Marxists and those who follow Marxist principles, quote unquote, to true belief, as persistence on this economism, as moralistic accusations of duplicity and bad faith, or of naivety and stupidity. This is Gramsci, by the way, just to clarify. Gramsci was one outlier as well in the 20th century by describing Marxist views like this. The giants of 20th century socialist philosophy, Adorno and Horkheimer, described Marxist philosophy as needing revision, adding on, changing. It is with this rationale that they included so much of psychoanalysis, of mystic studies, of sociological studies. Other members of the Frankfurt School similarly made such revisions. Franz Neumann even described the Nazi system as not a state, that is fundamentally anti-Marxist. At this point, I think my point is starting to make clear, I hope. If the Marxists of the 20th century, bearing in mind they were writing at the early Frankfurt School of the 20th century, did not deem Marx's works, henceforth Marxism, as applicable, how can we then try to pretend that what happened 100 years ago, which was irrelevant, is now relevant now? Well, now we've come to the 21st century. It is important to note that some might say Marxism is malleable, it is amendable, that it can change, that we can adjust some things and make it work for the 21st century. And to that, I have a thought experiment. Okay, let us understand what we mean by 21st century Marxism. We are to remove the ideas of Marx that call for X, Y, and Z, which aren't applicable, that were applicable in the 19th century, and things have changed because relations of production have changed, and so has technology. And yes, we are to remove this part and add this bit from sociological studies, from post-colonial studies, in psychoanalysis. Freudo-Marxism exists, if anyone's interested. At what point have we reconstructed the ship of thesis? At what point is what we have just a 19th century philosophy that's just not relevant anymore? At what point have we changed the fundamental tenets so much that what we have at hand is not Marxism? The most common argument set against this is that the supremacy of the economic foundation remains fundamental, which has yet to change, and the proposition has rightfully noted that out. I won't repeat myself again, but I'd like to consider the arguments that I put forth from Gramsci. On top of this, if the supremacy of economics as understanding society is the root belief of our formulation of normative politics, then we have to understand that why our social analysis isn't called Smithian or Ricardian. Why aren't we going infinite regression to say who took influence from X and Y and Z? This isn't merely a semantic issue, by the way, of what we describe as Marxism and or not Marxism. This is an important aspect of making original thought, which I will come to later. Okay, if we say the economics isn't the part we want to keep, the labor theory of value, let's say, that we want to look at the emancipatory nature, then in what form do we wish to do this? Marx himself said an understanding of emancipation is contingent on time and on place. Hence, you have prefaces to the Communist Manifesto written for Germany, written for Russia, written for the UK. Are we to use the same systems that Marx devised 2 centuries ago to our modern condition? And the modern condition, which I agree with the proposition on, is very many, that there are very many issues facing us. But to use the 19th century solutions to 19th century problems in the 21st century simply is not feasible. If this has not been clear so far, I want to expand on a bit of chronology here. It is well known that practically all of the giant thinkers of Western philosophy took inspiration from the classical authors. You've got Plato, Aristotle, to the classical scripts that formulated Western political thought. Why then, if we are changing the substance of the thinkers in quote-unquote minor ways or amending them, we all start calling ourselves Platonists or Aristotelian in the way we consider ourselves? After all, it was these Western thinkers who formulated much of the important arguments and formulated many of the arguments that a lot of people took inspiration or used it as a rebuttal to. And like I said, this infinite regression is not a semantic issue. And I'm coming to a bit of a polemic ending here. If our political heritage and future rests upon the ideas of a writer in the 19th century, we on the left have failed. Those on the right draw upon a wide range of heritage of thought. Conservatives, ironically enough, formulate new thoughts every year on how to adjust their philosophies to changing time. We on the left have stagnated. We are sticking to 19th century philosophies for our current condition, which is why we fall blank on our faces every single time we try to make radical reforms. Why cannot we do the same? Why are we content with rehashing old arguments instead of formulating new thoughts relevant to the 21st century? The ecology, brilliant example here, okay? What did Marx have to say about ecology? There are finite resources and that's about it. Did he foresee global warming? No. Did AI happen? No. And I'm not saying, and I understand there was a point of information here about he wasn't a fortune teller, but we have to understand, go back to the ship of thesis example I gave. Marxism, if we change it to a fundamental, so fundamentally that this is what's happening in the 21st century, it can no longer be classified as Marxism. And I'm just nearing the end. I know it's a bit shorter than expected, but the speech never intended to debase Marx as being unserious or not worthy of note. On the contrary, if the left wishes to move on from Marx and make the radical solutions to the giant issues of climate change, of global poverty, of global scarcity, we need to formulate new, original thought. excuse me for the pun, but we need to throw the shackles of Marxism off, and innovative new policies are needed that rely on modern understandings of 21st century, of modern understandings of capitalism. And the way we relate ourselves to each other, the way we relate to environment, the way we relate, hell, even to space. These new formulations are required, and to use 19th century philosophy is simply out of date. Our relation to political thought, therefore, has to change. To fall back on the promise of Marx is a cop-out from the left. Innovation is needed in thought, and I cannot, in good conscience, argue that we have to go back to the ideas of a 19th century thinker to get us out of our modern condition. We can and must do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerem. Can we please have one last round of applause for all our paper speakers this evening? This was an exciting, informed and engaged debate, so thank you so much for participating. To vote, we vote with our feet here. The doors for the ayes are to the right, the doors for the noes are to the left, and abstentions down the middle. Next week's debate is This House Believes Modern Technology Will Destroy Liberal Democracy, and we'll be delighted to see you there soon. See you tomorrow, see you next week, and see you in the bar.